Hey, it's Mirna from Trainers Toolbox. Welcome to the Trainers Toolbox podcast, a place where you can discover practical and effective tools and tips to make your workshops more insightful, engaging, and memorable. You are at the right place if you're looking to become the best trainer you can be and design truly impactful learning experiences. Ready? Let's dive in. Today's episode, it's a bit more for fresh trainers. But if you're an experienced trainer, you will still find some pretty cool tips and useful tips for yourself too. Now, first things first. First thing you need to know, in your first workshops and in any of your workshops, it's okay to make mistakes. We all make mistakes and we will always be making mistakes. So being that you're a fresh trainer or a new trainer, mistakes will happen and that's okay. However, if you keep the 7 tips in mind, the 7 tips I'll share today, it's very likely that regardless of any mistakes and sidetracks that might happen in your workshop, that your participants still have a strong and impactful learning experience. And ultimately, that's what we want to achieve. The point is not to make a perfect workshop. The point is to make it memorable, impactful, and that learning really happens. So stay with me for these 7 tips to get some insights and ideas. How can you ensure that the learning experience survives even any mishaps and mistakes? And of course, as always, if you don't have your notebook at hand and it's not the perfect time for you to make notes, maybe you're on the go, remember you can always download the summary of all the 7 tips from the link in episode notes. Now, let's dive right in. First, and potentially the most important thing to keep in mind when designing our training. Tip number 1, always keep the learning goal in mind. Now, this sounds a little bit basic, but if you look at what is one of the most common and biggest mistakes that happen in trainings and workshops, it's exactly this one. It's really easy, especially as trainers where we love our content and we love the things we talk about, and it's easy to get entangled in interesting discussion with our participants. The goal, the learning goal, remains the compass that truly shapes the experience and that helps us ensure we don't get sidetracked. Because of that, one of the most important steps is at the very beginning, before you even start thinking about the content or the design, to be perfectly clear on that learning goal. And right now, also an important hint, participants will learn this or that is not a good way of shaping the learning goal. The verb learn is simply not precise enough. So make sure that your learning goal is very specific, very precise, and you know exactly what you're looking to achieve with the workshop. And make sure you know that from the very beginning. This will lead every other decision in the workshop. And this will ensure that all the decisions you make in a design and delivery are good and are actually supporting that goal. For example, in design, when choosing, should I go with this content or that content? Should I trim some content or can I fit it all in? Which activity should I choose for this? Which activity should I prioritize? Should I be short on time? All these decisions are based on us being very clear what are we looking to achieve and which bits are crucial for us to achieve that. At the same time, in delivery, when maybe participants have questions that pull us in a different direction, or maybe they get entangled in a really exciting discussion, or maybe an activity extends longer than we planned, and now we have short time and we need to choose what do we prioritize. All these decisions will be able to make the best choice in each of them only if we are super clear and we have that goal always in our mind as the compass. So that's the most important tip. Again, sounds obvious, but I see it not happening enough in general. Most important tip, keep that goal always in mind. Start with the goal and use the goal as compass during your delivery. Now, tip number 2. This one is a bit more on the side of motivation. And you see, the most important thing for successful session, what do you think it will be? Will it be your design? Will it be your expertise? Will it be your knowledge? Will it be your ability to facilitate? No, the most important thing for a successful session will be participant motivation and interest. And participants' motivation and interest shapes by understanding How will this knowledge be relevant for them, for their lives, for their skills, for their progress in some way? In other words, the question that is always on their mind, maybe not consciously, but it's always on their mind, and especially at the beginning of the session, is the question, what's in it for me? What am I actually gaining out of this session? And frankly, this is the most important question in your session. And it is the question you need to answer first. Until you make it very clear and very sharp, why will this workshop or learning or topic be valuable and impactful for your participants? Nothing else is important, because you don't know if they'll be motivated and if they'll be engaged. So think, how can you very early make it very clear, what will this workshop help them do or solve or improve or avoid in their life? How will it impact their lives? How will it be truly relevant for them? And make sure you're not communicating what's in it for me, but just stating, the name of the topic, the name of the content. Here you need to be much smarter, and I would even say sneakier sometimes, to introduce different benefits of the topic, maybe to facilitate and discuss it with them. What do they think impact might be? Sometimes maybe you will tell it through a story, through an anecdote, through an experience you share, or even through video. But in some way, that beginning has to be the attention getter and the motivation booster. And you get that by answering, what's in it for me? Now, ready for our tip number 3? If you need a bit of time to think, I know I'm a fast speaker, so if you need a bit of time to think, don't be shy to pause the podcast for a moment and reflect a bit on the things I share. How are you doing them? How are they going for you? Now, our tip number 3 is using multiple learning channels. What do I mean here? As humans, we perceive the world and process the world through different channels of perception. And we have channels and parts of our brain that deal with verbal information or auditory information. We have parts that deal with visual information, and we also deal with things through our body and sensory input. And we use all these senses and sensory input at the same time. And we're used to perceiving the world at the same time through all of these channels. And we're also used to and want to learn by using all of these channels simultaneously. Now, here is what happens often in a workshop. Maybe sometimes we overwhelm an individual channel. We talk too fast or too much, which we need to learn or to manage or to highlight the most important things, even if we overwhelm a little bit. And maybe we don't use other channels enough, or maybe we overwhelm the visual channel. We throw a slide or complex visual with them, with a million little things on them, and they can hardly process all of it at the same time. So we might still need to do that, but then we want to make sure we highlight the right things and we guide people in the right way through each of parts of that visual. So we want to be very mindful for all these channels, auditory and verbal, visual, and let's call it kinesthetic, the body related, the senses related channel. We want to be very mindful not to overwhelm an individual channel, but we want to be equally mindful that we use all of them in a congruent way. That the message that we transfer in our words and in spoken is aligned with the message we transfer visually, and if possible, that we also in some way engage the body and the physical and kinesthetic aspect in that same experience. So on one side with visuals, we want to be very mindful not to overwhelm neither of the channels, but on the second hand, the most equally important thing is to use these multiple learning channels simultaneously in a congruent way to support this very same message. Tip number 4, make sure you relate the content of the things you're sharing with them to their participants' real world. Adult learners are really motivated to learn where there is a connection between the concepts and ideas with something in their own life, right? We kind of covered that in tip 2 with what's in it for me. But it's also really important to keep that connection with the real world going, also from the perspective, how will they actually use this knowledge? How will they apply it? How will they implement it? And in some way, really thinking with that learning transfer in mind, how do I ensure that the knowledge that they gain here doesn't stay only theoretical and in the setting of this workshop, but that they really take it away as well and implement it. So one strong bit of connecting the content with participants' real world happens in that beginning of the session that I named before, when you're sharing what's in it for me. But another really important bit happens throughout the session, when it is really important that you keep connecting the concepts with their real world. That for every new bit of theory or experience or tool that you share with them and that they discover and learn, that you keep connecting it by asking questions such as, how will you use this? How would this work in your own life? How could you adapt this for scenarios from your own reality? And this way, they will get the chance to connect all the different bits, and you will really strengthen a lot the ability that they actually implement and use that knowledge after the workshop. So you will strengthen the learning transfer. Now, this is especially important during the debriefings, so after you finish the activity, to allow a bit of that time and space for integration of knowledge, and also to allow them to cross-connect that with their own life. Too often we keep moving between learning points and activities one after the other without truly allowing that space for connection with what will you do with that. And then we want to do that especially at the end, in the closing, where we ask them what are their main takeaways, where we actually give them some time and process to design a certain action plan, and we really support them that they bring this knowledge further into the action in their own life by ensuring that they have specific enough understanding how can they truly apply that and implement that. So we want to start the session with what's in it for me, to motivate and to build that bridge with their own world and reality. But then we want to keep that thread going throughout the workshop with every insight, with every bit of a tool or theory, keep connecting with that. And then especially in the briefings and closing, we want to wrap it together, connect it strongly, and making sure that they do have a plan, where is it going further. Without that connection with the real world, the knowledge just stays in the learning room and it's not really becoming useful in their real life. Now, the next tip is about one more thing that people, trainers, facilitators, often forget to plan for. And to be honest, it really makes or breaks the training, and that is the transitions. Too often as trainers, we focus on design of activities, design of bits of experience and how will they feel like, and the cycle of learning that happens within these activities. How will we open them? How will we facilitate them? How will we close them? And then we plan the next one. But sometimes we miss to plan for transitions to also be really well connected. And what can happen then is that transitions are maybe too choppy, too abrupt, that people don't have full chance to integrate and process things from the previous activity, and they accidentally bring them into the next activity. Or maybe there are some residual emotions or questions that are still running in their head that are still with the previous activities. So we want to be very mindful of transitions. We want to make sure that the next activity is built on the foundation, on emotional and mental foundation of what happened in the previous activity. And we also want to make sure that then transition is pretty clear, that there is pretty clear switch, maybe sometimes change of space or outline of a space if that helps, or maybe a new visual we present, or some sort of new title or a story that marks that transition. Whatever you do with transition, what I want to say is be really just mindful that transitions are not just, like pressing stop and play button and now the new experience starts, but that they really need to be coherent, that they need to create the flow of your workshop and your training by connecting bits and pieces and by creating this fluid and smooth transition between different parts. For this, it is really important to actually give it a thought a bit when planning your training. From this activity, what will people live with, and how will that influence the beginning of the next activity? Do I need to create better connection between the two activities and smoother transition? Or do I need to create maybe sometimes a bit sharper transition, make sure we have a good closing and a bit of a mindset shift and then the new beginning? Should these activities flow together and build on top of each other, or should we switch gears in some way? Whichever it is, we want to do that mindfully and not accidentally. So really think of these transitions in the training. And then my next tip is one that is really a bit more targeted to fresh trainers and new trainers, because it's also one of the biggest miss-outs and mistakes that can happen when you are new as a trainer, and that really can cost you a lot in how the activities work out. And that's all about giving instructions. You know, we all have instructions for the activity in our mind, and we think if we just talk it out, it will be super clear and everybody will know what we mean. And often we miss to mention some crucial little bit of info. Or maybe sometimes when giving instructions, we don't present them in the optimal way. Maybe we over-explain them a little bit, or we just miss to mention something that to us seems obvious. So with instructions, we really want to be explicit and very, very clear. Now, when you gain more experience as a trainer, then it becomes more and more natural that you don't need to prepare a lot to give clear instructions. And with experience, you get more skill in having this easy and not need to think about it a lot. But when you're a bit new to it, or maybe when you're doing a new activity for the first time, you haven't been giving instructions for yet, I would highly, highly recommend that you prepare instructions in a way that you actually write for yourself. You won't be reading it, but write it out so you would gain clarity of step by step, how will this sound, how will you present them. So write it out, seek to make the instructions as concise, but with all the information that's important, and really seek to make them step by step and to nail down the right order of steps. That is really important, because when we do it spontaneously, it can get a little bit confusing. So do prepare, write it down, check those notes, and then you don't need to use these notes when you're presenting instructions to participants, even though you can, but you don't need to. It's important that you write it out so you would define step by step and what are the crucial bits of information you shouldn't forget. Now, the second tip I would offer to both experienced and new trainers is to make sure to also provide instructions to participants in some visual or written format. If you are in online world, that can be on a slide, or it can also be by copying some text in chat or giving them a link on which the instructions are, depending on the complexity of the activity. In the real room, they can be printed, or again, they can be on a slide or on a flip chart or on a visual. But it is important, you don't need to outline every little bit of instruction that you need to share with them. You'll say that verbally, but it is important that you outline the crucial steps or the crucial question that they need to be doing. Because people often, even if they're listening to you, they might get slightly overwhelmed by all the instructions you're sharing. They might get distracted for a moment, and you don't want them to have the mental load of thinking about what were the instructions. You want them to invest all their mental cognitive abilities into working with the task and resolving the task, and not thinking, am I clear on the instructions? Because of that, you want to make it really easy that they have something in written. And the good practice is when you give them that thing in written, that's just kind of the key question or the key quick steps without a lot of text, without a lot of explanation. So you will explain it a bit more abundantly, but you will give them just a very quick, direct step by step. And also in instructions, you might want to pay attention to including what is the expected outcome and also what should their process be. This is important to separate. If you just give them the process, they will blindly follow your steps, like discuss this topic. Their discussion might not be very relevant. So you might make instructions more goal-oriented, such as, you will discuss this topic, and the goal for that is that you just hear what might be other ways of approaching it that other people in the group have or that they tried. So the goal is sharing and exchanging perspectives. Or maybe in another group, I'll give instructions that are more like, your goal is to come up with steps of what you think is the best way of doing this. So maybe in the first part, maybe in the first 5 minutes out of these 10 minutes, you will just share ideas on what the good steps might be. And then in the second half, the second 5 minutes, make sure you actually discuss and pick the ideas you like the best and that you want to propose as the best solution. Do you see how these two discussions would be different? How in the first one, people would really just be sharing openly their experiences and thoughts, and they would be curious, they would maybe dig in deeper into different experiences, but they wouldn't reason critically, they wouldn't go to any conclusion. And that might be perfectly okay if that's aligned with my goal for that activity. That, of course, then aligns to the goal of the workshop. But in this second example, they'll much more be oriented on how do you actually do this? What would be a good way of doing this? They will still allow a bit of time for sharing and listening, but then they'll really think critically and design conclusions and think what do they do with it. Their process and their outcome will be very different. But if I just give them the process and I just say, hey, share your experience with this and think of the best solution, they might rush to that conclusion, or maybe they might not be clear on what is the priority, then they might just speak for sake of speaking. So I always want to make sure I share 3 things. 1, why are we doing this? What is the goal of this discussion? I say that, or this exercise or activity. I say that to motivate them, but I also say it so they could navigate their discussion and their journey a bit. And then the second thing, what roughly the process should be. Should they stay all the time with the same thing? Should they split it in some sort of steps? Should they have a bit different phases? Should they pick a facilitator or somebody who will present the outcomes in the end? In which way will they need to present that outcome? Will it be in written, in chat, or will it be on a slide or just verbally? How will they do they need to prepare something for that? So what are all the things they actually need to do step by step? And then the third thing, apart from outcome and the process, is potentially rough timing they should use for different steps. That will help them navigate their journey, and with that you will ensure they're actually successful. Now, I shared a lot here just in the clear instructions, so you definitely might want to think a little bit about that. Which tips are you actually integrating and incorporating here, and how will you actually use them? And now our final tip number 7, it is to protect the debriefing. Now, this is probably the biggest thing that will break the learning if it doesn't happen well. You see, often trainers have a misconception of what the most important moment in a workshop is. What is that moment that is really the moment when learning happens, the moment when insights emerge? Too often we think it's the moment when we're sharing some knowledge. Nah, not really. Now, if you're a bit more in trainer's shoes, facilitator shoes, then often we will think, oh, it's in the moment of experience. But actually, surprise, surprise, the biggest insights truly happen in that quality reflection after the experience. They come from experience. They're based on the experience, on the activity they did, on the experience they had. But they truly emerge in the moment of the briefing. That is why that's a moment you need to protect at all costs. And that's a skill you really, really need to practice to become better and better with the way you're doing the briefing, and to really separate between different phases of the briefing. One, when people just process knowledge and still kind of digest and chew on things that happen. And the second one, where you're actually guiding them towards the insight or toward a conclusion from that experience and from that knowledge. So the briefing is a superpower and one of the most important skills for a trainer or facilitator. And first thing you need to ensure to do is to truly protect it, that you don't get distracted, that you don't lose the time, that you don't move to the next activity too fast. And then within that protected space, you can learn to do it better and better. Now, these 7 tips are obviously just the beginning of what makes workshop great. If you want to really practice this, get better at all these elements, from the briefing to giving clear instructions, to motivating participants, to helping them implement things after the training. If you really want to practice and nail down all these skills and many more skills that make a trainer great, I would strongly encourage you to join me on Train the Trainer, a course that's also an experiential journey, partially online over several months and with 2 live days, where we really practice and strengthen and build amazing skills to be a really great trainer, to be the best trainer you can be, to fill in any gaps, and to truly make your strengths shine. So I do want to invite you, if you're considering how could I become better trainer, how could I nail down more impactful and memorable workshops, consider joining me on Train the Trainer. The link is in the description of this podcast episode, and you can always get in touch. Easiest way is on LinkedIn or by replying to any of the newsletters that I send on Trainers Toolbox. Links are also in the description. So you're very welcome to also reach out. Let me know if you're curious to understand more about Train the Trainer and to discuss, is that the right journey for you? And if you have any questions or suggestions that are related to this podcast episode, also get in touch. Let's connect. Let's talk. I would love to hear your input. What was valuable? What still remained unclear? Which topic should I explore further? Now, I still want to invite you for a really, really important part of your learning, and that is that you take a moment to reflect on your insights from today's episode. I will remind you one more time and summarize very briefly the 7 tips that I shared, and I want to invite you as I do that to really think which of these 7 tips, pick 1 or 2, do I really want to focus on in my next workshop, and what will I do differently in my next workshop, even if it's a very small thing. Now, here were the tips. First, always keeping the learning goal in mind. Always make sure the learning goal is clear, super clear before you even start design, and make sure all the decisions in your design and delivery are based on that learning goal. Second, start every session by answering why. Why are we here and what's in it for me, for the participants, to make sure they're motivated and engaged. Third, ensure you use multiple processing channels or learning channels. Use verbal and auditory and visual and kinesthetic, and seek to use them in a congruent way, but not to overwhelm any of them. 4, make sure you relate the content to participants' real world. At the beginning, at the end of the session, and throughout different activities, keep building that connection with the real world. 5th, make sure you plan the transitions, not just the activities, but also the connections and the flow between the activities. 6, ensure your instructions are super clear. If needed, prepare them several times to make sure you nail it down. And with time, you will actually get more natural in giving clear instructions. In that, separate between the goal of the activity, the process and the steps, and maybe timing of different steps, and make sure you also share the instructions in written. And 7, make sure to protect the briefing and keep on building your skills in the briefing. By the way, I'm also delivering a masterclass on the briefing, which will help you nail down these skills. I will also link it into the descriptions. It's 2 hours long, virtual, and you're super welcome to join me to deepen those skills. But with the debriefing, the first thing you need to do is make sure you're doing it after every activity and that you really protect the time for it. And then you can also seek to keep on growing your skills. Now, I really hope you enjoyed this episode and you got some new learnings and insights. I do want to invite you to also share it with other trainers and facilitators who you think would find it relevant. It is built more for a new trainer in mind. However, I think there are tips here that will be useful for experienced trainers as well. If you liked it, do also like it, subscribe to different channels to keep in touch with the next episodes. The next one I'm recording will be about the traps you want to avoid in your workshops. So a bit similar to this, but with some different angles and new ideas. I hope you will join me for that one. And the best way to make sure you know when the episode is out is to subscribe on channels on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcast, or to keep an eye on Trainers Toolbox newsletter. I send it weekly, and you can also sign up for it in the description of this episode. Do stay in touch, let me know your feedback and thoughts, and see you soon with the 7 traps to avoid in the next episode. Thank you for exploring this topic with me. I hope you found some exciting ideas and valuable tools that you will use already today. Remember, they only work if you put them in practice, but then they make all the difference. If you enjoy Trainers Toolbox podcast, do leave a rating and review. It does mean a lot. And if you haven't done it yet, click on the links in the episode descriptions and discover free materials and valuable resources to dive in deeper. See you in the next episode or at Trainers Toolbox newsletter.